Mikey Please, you, along with Dan Ojari, directed the animated short Robin Robin, which is about a robin who is raised by mice and wants to prove that she can be a good mouse to fit in with her family. Where did the inspiration for this story come from?
Ooh, we found a small mouse being raised by a family of robins, and we thought, wouldn't it be interesting? No, that's not true. No, so Dan and I shared a studio after we graduated. Initially, just to sort of share equipment. Actually, we were both stop motion animators, but then we found actually the sort of more interesting thing we were sharing were our kind of little kernels of ideas. And the story for Robin Robin, I think it came about relatively quickly in one evening after we'd sort of finished our main work for the day, and we started talking about this story of a robin being raised by a family of mice, and where that actually came from, we're not too sure. Dan thinks that maybe it was his wife mentioned, wouldn't it be nice to do a story about a robin? But basically the situation we found so interesting and fun, and immediately it led to all these different sort of avenues that it really stuck with us. So this fairly quick premise that came about in an evening then stuck with us for about 5 years, and we'd be constantly telling this story to like our family and friends, and particularly like around winter time. And so it became this sort of oral tradition story that we would kind of pin people to the wall and try and hold their attention all the way to the end of this story. And so after that quite long time of just telling people this story in a verbal way, we thought, oh, maybe it's good enough to try and actually do something else with it. So we then put together this little picture book where we'd sort of roughly illustrated just as a way to convey the story. And we worked with one of our favorite illustrators, Brian E. May Smith, to pull together some kind of world images, and then took it to try and pitch to people. But yeah, the story itself, we really couldn't say where it came from. It was just a conversational delight that turned up one evening.
What was it like designing just designing the characters, creating the puppets, materials you'd use, color, size, shape, like the personality of it? Like how involved was that process?
Wow, yeah, that's I suppose that, so the overall visual aesthetic of the production evolved over a long period. So obviously Dan and I are both stop motion animators, so we have a style in our other work which has developed over the years of collaborating on lots of various projects. And I think one of the sort of distinctive things maybe about our particular kind of stop motion is that it's always got this very illustrative foundation. So we really like to build compositions to camera, so to work with very kind of bold graphic compositions rather than say like building a sort of 3D world like a doll's house set and moving the camera around it. We like to start from an illustration. So with Robin Robin, we brought in another hero of ours, an illustrator and painter called Matthew Forsyth, who was our production designer. So he was a big part of forming that kind of overall visual look. And one of the things that we really loved about his work, as well as it sort of feeling like a quite very classical painting, but with a quite contemporary design approach, one of the things that we loved was this really deep approach to color. So there was lots of hues overlaying each other, where a little bit like a sort of Lucian Freud painting, where a green might give the impression of a green, but actually when you look into it, there's blues and reds and pinks and all these things working together. And that felt very thematically resonant with what we wanted to say with the film as well, which is about how different things, when they come together, can form something richer. So that was nice to find that visual expression of that idea. It was quite a deep question. There's loads of it. So the materials, we use needle felt wool for the characters, but actually the world is a whole spectrum of materials and approaches. There's lots of carved wood and other textiles at work, but the fact that the needle felt characters were always kind of right in the center of the screen, and it's a really tactile material that it's really hard to do in any other way. That's why we liked it as well. It's like, it's definitely stop motion. There's no other material or way of reproducing that. But the fact that we had that very tactile thing front and center meant that we could kind of go to town on the cinematicness of the rest of the image. So we kept that, the characters very grounded, and were able to make the world feel quite sort of epic and atmospheric and cinematic.
And part of another part of bringing this story to life involved you and your co-director sort of acting out scenes to create kind of visual references for the film. Like, how long is that process? And do you ever get self-conscious, you know, in these moments where you're, you know, becoming a robin, becoming a magpie?
Yeah, it is extremely embarrassing to do, and certainly to see some of those clips kind of creep out into the world. But it's an extremely helpful part of the production. You know, anyone who's worked animation knows that it's a process of tiny steps, and they can often be quite arduous and slow. And so to have that little window of the day where you can be very loud and expressive and spontaneous and become those characters was a great part of the day. But we had to do it alone. we're not the kind of actors who can stand up in front of the whole crew and be like, this is it. So making those live action references were extremely helpful as well, especially during the pandemic, which is obviously when we were shooting, which is obviously stop motion. There's all different kind of ways of doing it, but our particular production was maybe more like a live action shoot, in that we couldn't all do it remotely. We all had to be in one place, one building, but we weren't allowed to spend a lot of time with each other. So these live action references were a brilliant way to kind of communicate to our actors, who are the animators, exactly what we were trying to get across.
And stop motion animation in general is, you know, just such a painstaking process with how much work and attention to detail goes into just every single second of footage. You know, where do you develop that, you know, patience to, you know, have this story envisioned and watch it be created basically a frame at a time?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. People often attribute sort of stop motion to patience, but the funny thing is, I think we're actually all incredibly impatient. You know, we're always wanting to kind of push forward to the next step. But I think it's I suppose a process of being able to kind of compartmentalize a process and be quite regimented and organized. So I think it's a case of organization more than patience. Yeah, you do have to kind of break down what you're doing into 1,000 little steps, but actually once those little steps are broken down, you can be quite impatient about how you get through them. Does that make sense? Probably not.
And you know, you've also assembled an impressive cast: Bronte Carmichael as Robin, also Richard E. Grant as Magpie, Gillian Anderson as Cat. Like, what was it like assembling that cast? You know, did you have actors in mind at the outset? Like, what went into that?
Yeah, it was extraordinary how that cast came together, and they all kind of came on board within a space of 2 weeks. So there were these really exciting moments where we're like, we've got Bronte and we've got Richard. But Richard E. Grant was certainly someone who we had very centrally as our Magpie character. We had lots of pictures of him in With Nail and I and various other productions on our kind of character design pinboard. Not so much for the character himself of With Nail, because Magpie is actually he has that slight sort of misanthropic edge, but actually he's a much warmer character in his heart. But there's something about the humor of being able to kind of take the mick out of someone who's from a very high status, which is the Richard E. Grant character. So being able to kind of undercut his view of the world, which is a very materialistic, shallow approach, and make fun of it was perfect. And as soon as we put Richard E. Grant in that role, even as we were doing the development, it clicked and it worked. So to actually get the real Richard E. Grant to come and do the voice was a huge thrill. And working with them in the recording, we got some real recording time with them, and then a lot of it was done remotely. But those first few sessions where we were all in the room together and kind of workshopping the characters were just extraordinary. Like I remember looking over to Dan, and as Richard was singing his Magpie song, and just sort of flashing through the 6 years of having kind of wrote that song in our studio in our quite sort of humble settings, then eventually all those steps to get to sit in the room with Richard and have him sing your song for you is amazing.